So where were we? So that's the basic Kaplan method. Okay, as you're reading, we want you to ask a lot of questions. Any examples of questions? Evan, can you read me one? Section C.
Why did the author write this?
Great, yeah, exactly. Juan, you got one?
Why did the author include these more details on this?
Okay. Raul?
What side is the author taking?
Good. And what other kinds of questions might you want to ask? Those are good examples that the book gives you. And how about in your own mind? Anything else?
What's important?
Right, what's important in this passage? Right? At the end of every paragraph, you can stop for a quarter of a second and say, what was this passage about? What was this paragraph about? You can underline or circle any keywords that you come across. That's a really good way to do it. Or rewrite them in the margin. I find if I write something, it helps me to remember it. Yes?
I was taught, well, I had this like S&P prep course in my school, and they said you just look at the questions first, and then like you'll see if there's any specific line, just like go back.
We'll get to that.
Right.
So it depends on what kind of passage you're looking at, whether you want to read the questions first or not. So we will get to that as a method. So if you're reading a long passage, though, we want you to map the passage first. And that's what we call it when you go through and you underline stuff that's important and you write in the margins things that you want to remember. And maybe the keywords, what the passage is about, what this particular paragraph is about. If you notice any place where the author's tone or opinion comes through really strongly, like sometimes you'll have an author who's kind of sarcastic, and you want to make note of that when you see it. And as I said, you want to put a little asterisk next to anything, or a star, or whatever you want to use, next to anything where the voice changes, where somebody else said something besides the author. Okay, very good. Don't just read with your eyes, read with your pencil. Take notes as you go and ask questions. You're asking questions of yourself and of the passage. All right? And the way critical reading works is that there's no point at which you need to know something to answer the questions from outside what's in the passage. Everything you need is in the passage. It's like taking an open book test. There's the book. Now you have to go find the answers in it. Okay? That sometimes helps people. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at a passage, and as we go through it, we're going to map it together. Okay, everybody ready? Got your pencils at ready? Here we go. For 4 months in the fall of 1940, citizens of the Puget Sound area of Washington used one of the most illustrious and most dangerous suspension bridges ever built. The Tacoma Narrows Bridge, or Galloping Gertie, enjoyed a relatively short life compared to similar structures in the United States. But in its short career, Gertie taught important lessons on what to do and what not to do when building a suspension bridge. So what did we learn in this paragraph so far? Stephen?
There was a bridge in Washington called the Tacoma Narrows Bridge.
Right, and so I'm going to just write in the margin Tacoma Narrows Bridge, or I'm going to underline Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Good. Raul?
It failed.
Yeah, something went wrong, right? We don't quite know what it is yet, but clearly something's gone wrong with this bridge, right? Very good. Okay, anything else? So you can underline Galloping Gertie, you could underline Washington, 1940, you could put a circle around that. State officials in Washington saw a need for a bridge across Puget Sound to connect the city of Tacoma on the mainland with the Olympic Peninsula on the other side. The closest point was the Tacoma Narrows, a windy 2,800-foot gap that at the time appeared to be the ideal place for a suspension bridge. Construction began in November of 1938, and the bridge was officially opened on July 1st, 1940. Spanning the length of the Narrows, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge was the third largest span in the world at the time, and was hailed by the public as a triumph of engineering. Okay, so what's important about this one? We have this one, there's something wrong with the bridge, and that's the first paragraph, and now we're on to the second paragraph. What would we say about it?
Why it was built.
Yeah, why it was built. Anything else? What happens over the course of that paragraph? Stephen?
The bridge was built.
Yeah, so it's the construction process happens there. And notice that the author says the public saw it as a triumph of engineering.
I kind of feel like he's like making fun of them because he said it appeared to be an ideal place, and then.
Excellent. That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah. You get this sense that he's making fun of the people who are involved in this project because it appeared to be, which is a kind of unusual way to describe something unless it clearly wasn't, right? Good. And he brings up that everyone saw it in one way, but actually something else was going on. In accordance with the architectural trends of the period, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge emphasized slim, streamlined forms and slender structures. The towers were sleek and tall, and its pencil-thin roadway appeared to float delicately above the water, hanging gracefully from the light, airy cables. The engineers saw a bridge that was light, beautiful, and sturdy, one that would stand the test of time. So what's this paragraph about?
It describes the bridge.
Yeah, and yeah, what it looks like. So the design of the bridge. Anything else we want to make note of? Got a who said what?
He uses a lot of adjectives to like emphasize how like slim, like flimsy it is.
Okay, you get the sense that there might be some flimsiness involved, right? Good. So he's using these adjectives that are beautiful, but there's something sort of flimsy about them. Good.
The engineers thought it was like sturdy.
Right. So he points out that the engineers looked at it and saw something fabulous. And we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, as the expression goes, right? Something bad is going to happen in this last paragraph. Can you tell? Stephen?
With like in the paragraph before where he says that it appeared to be the ideal place, how the engineers saw the bridge, would that be more like a criticism or like sarcasm, like satire?
It is a little bit, the tone is definitely something out of the ordinary. And I think it's leading us to a conclusion we're about to get to. So that's very good observation. You guys are doing great at picking out what's important about this passage. Excellent. All right, here we go. Even during construction, though, the bridge acquired its ominous nickname. Although they knew about form and structure, the bridge's engineers failed to take its aerodynamics into account, particularly the gusts of the Narrows and their effect on the roadway. Because the roadbed was made of solid, stiffening plate girders, it could not absorb the winds of the sound. Instead, the road acted like a giant sail, collecting the force of the gusts. The narrowness of the bridge, it was only 2 lanes wide, made it extremely flexible. Therefore, on any windy day, the roadway buckled and contorted, or galloped, hence its nickname. The undulation became so severe that the bridge was eventually closed to traffic. So what's this last paragraph about?
How it failed.
Right, the failure of the design, which was basically aerodynamic, for those of you who are thinking in those career lines. They forgot to do wind tunnel testing, and whoops, big problems, right? I'll send you the link for the YouTube showing it collapsing. It's pretty amazing. They have it on film. Actual film, like film camera film, because it was 1940, so, nobody had their iPhone. So, it's pretty amazing to watch, though, and especially for those of you who appreciate physics, it's an incredible visual effect to watch an actual bridge in a sine wave pattern.
They filmed it collapsing, so they kind of like knew it was going to collapse.
Well, it was filmed by a guy who was on the bridge, and it started doing the galloping Gertie thing, and he and everyone else who were on the bridge at the time abandoned their cars and ran off to the side, and he happened to have a camera with him, a film camera, and shot it. So it's kind of a remarkable thing. They also have just some footage during the construction of it doing Latin things. It was a really bad idea. So in this passage, we have the failure of the bridge, right? And now we can see where all of this, the author's sarcasm or irony or whatever was pointed toward Okay? Page 100. Here's a question. Bisong, would you read it for me?
The author most likely states the engineer's opinions on the bridge in order to...
Okay, so we're going to go back and look at that quote, page 27, or lines 27 through 29. Emil, would you read it? Lines 27 to 29, the last sentence of the third paragraph.
The engineer saw a bridge that was both beautiful and sturdy and one that would stand the test of time.
Okay, so we're putting our hands over the answers. Really, really. Like a big, nerdy, dorky person. Put your hand over the answers and just read the question. Okay? The author most likely states the engineer's opinion on the bridge in order to do what? One?
Contrast engineer's professional opinion with the bridge's ultimate result.
You're not supposed to be looking at the answers.
Well, I thought about it, and that's how I
Okay. So the idea, though, the method that we're trying to use is to state it in your own words and then go look for the answer. Okay? That's the right answer. But we'll do more of this. And I understand that you can pick up on the right answer pretty easily, but there will be some where this method will help you get through a complicated problem. This might not have been it, but the method still applies, okay? So let's look at the next section where we talk about adjusting your approach based on passage length. So here's where we get to what Danielle was talking about from her SAT prep class. What we're going to do is we're going to see that there are long passages like the one we just read, and there are short passages which are usually about this big. They're usually 1 or 2 paragraphs and no more than 2 inches long on the page, 2 or 3 inches. And what you're going to do is, if you see a short passage, you're going to read the question stems first, and then go look at the passage specifically for the answers to that question. That's not how we approach a long passage because it's too difficult to get those big picture views of that passage if you try to look at the 13 questions that apply to it and then go back to the passage. It just isn't efficient. So we don't do it that way. We map first. But let's look at this, why we read the question stems first with short passages. Any thoughts? Bisong?
Like you said, like get a bigger picture of what it's talking about.
Right, so if you're looking at a short passage, it might have 2 questions or 3 questions. A long passage will have somewhere between 5 and 13 questions. The amount of time it would take you to read them all and then go back, not going to be efficient. Okay, so let's look at this short passage. So what do we do first? Read the question stem, right. Bisong, would you read it for us?
In the paragraph, the author seems to present contrasting concepts of identity and metaphor in order to...
Okay, so we're going to now look at the passage, thinking about why the author talks about contrasting concepts of identity. With an enormous diversity of social, political, and cultural systems governing human life in vastly different ways around the globe, it is understandable that concepts of identity vary greatly from one country to the next. People who grow up in more individualistic societies, typically found in affluent nations, tend to see themselves as entities who are independent, distinct, autonomous, and endowed with unique dispositions. By contrast, people from more collectivist societies, most common in impoverished developing nations, are likely to hold interdependent views of themselves as part of a larger network that includes family, co-workers, friends, and others with whom they are socially connected. Now cover the answers, and let's read that question again. Bisong?
In the paragraph, the author seems to present contrasting concepts of identity in order to...
So why do we think the author brings up this idea of concepts of identity? Okay, Juan.
Because it's trying to say that people's identity differs from every nation.
Right, so there's something different there. So let's look and see if any of those answers actually pop out at us.
G or E?
Okay. Anybody have an opinion?
I think D.
I think D. I think D is right. See, it's much easier to find the one you're looking for if you have an idea in your head already that you're going after, okay? Rather than trying to read all of them and figure out which one's right. Danielle?
Like, I was stuck between D and E,
Mhm.
but, like, how would you pick the best answer out of that?
Well, there are a couple strategies. One is that you can just eliminate A, B, and C and choose randomly between D and E in the hopes that you've got the right answer. But what I would do first, if you aren't taking too long, is I would go back and read the question one more time and think about it again, and then go look at those two answers and see which one works best for you.
Since it's like in line 4, should I like try and find the answer within that line only, or look in like the rest of the passage? Because that's how I got E.
Yeah, I think that was misleading to a certain extent because you're looking at the whole passage and they're directing you to this one line.
Alright, so I should just like focus.
Yeah, focus in on what they ask you to focus in on. And know that, what we're doing in the book may or may not have as many answers, or as many questions attached to a particular passage as you'll actually see on the test. So we don't usually have 13 questions for a long passage in here. Yep, Raul?
Why does E not work?
E is a distortion, because the author never talks about individuality as important to impoverished nations.
Okay. But
So he or she talks about how in affluent nations individuality is key, and in impoverished nations it seems not to be as much of an issue.
okay.
Right? Okay, let's look at page 102. So what's the deal with paired passages? Why are they difficult?
So much to read, so much to, I don't
Yeah,
know.
there's a lot to read and a lot to remember. Juan?
It's two different point of views.
Right, and are they perfectly opposite each other? No. No, they mess with you and have people who agree on some things, but they disagree on some other things. Or they may even be talking about things that aren't as closely related as you might think. Different aspects of the same topic. So it can be very confusing. So this is what we suggest. They make up about a third of the reading comprehension questions, paired passages. There's going to be a long paired passage and a short paired passage on each test. Okay, so what do we do differently for the paired passages? The strategy is really easy, and it's right there in front of you. So Peyton, why don't you read that for us?
Read passage 1, answer questions about passage 1.
Great.
Read passage 2 and answer questions about passage 2.
Yes.
Answer questions that deal with both passages.
Right, exactly. And I'll tell you that when I came back to take the SAT again after so long, I found the paired passages really hard to handle. So I was very excited to read about this Kaplan strategy when I got a little more into the Kaplan world, because it really helps. It really helps to divide it up and conquer the questions that way. It really makes a difference. And it's not, I know it's not amazing, but it will really help you if you stick with it. So first answer the questions that are about passage 1, then answer the questions about passage 2, and then answer the questions that are about both. Stephen?
Would always say, like, as far as dividing, like, it'll state which passage it's looking for, like, as far as the question.
Yeah. Yeah, and usually what's going to happen is you're going to see, the first author talks about this, the second author talks about that, and then it'll say, if the first author had been asked this question that the second author presents, what do you think his answer might be? That's a typical sort of type of question that you're going to see. So they have these interesting ways of combining the two passages. Or how do their opinions differ on this one aspect of the topic? So as we go through today and in another class later in the course. So figure out what's going on with these reading comprehension sections. Okay?